So now we have two sets of dharmas. It's like the evolutes of Samkhya. You have your dharma and then somebody's dharma to remind you of your dharma, and then we have an infinite regress, what the philosophers call an infinite regress. So we began the sutra, the very raison d'être of the sutra, its way it understands itself, its reason for being is as a response to suffering. Okay, so because of suffering, then there arises a desire to know, no, why am I suffering? And in the sutra says, and if it is said that when all known means have failed, all known means to resolve suffering. We had the whole discussion last class. We don't have to go over that again. Remember the two Purva Pakshas. One Purva Paksha, and if you weren't here last class, please make a note of the term Purva Paksha, opposing point of view. Purva is the other, Paksha side, or the other, literally a wing of a bird, but a side. So Purva is the other. So the opposing point of view. So the two opposing points of view. One said, well, we have known means. We have, doctors and medicine to cure ills. We have good food to if we're hungry. So there are no means to counteract suffering. So that was one Purva Paksha. And the other Purva Paksha was the Vedic ritualists who said, well, fine, even if there's suffering, we can do our Vedic rituals, and in the next birth, we take birth in the celestial realm. That's how we'll solve our suffering. These were the two Purva Pakshas. And why are they the two? Because they were the most prominent. Vedic ritualism, remember, mainstream religion of the day. So then the Siddhanta is the school's point of view. Every school has its Siddhanta. So the Siddhanta then is, so the Purva Paksha is presented. This is typical in philosophical discourse, in commentarial exposition. You always introduce the opposing point of view, and then you respond. And the response was, well, those are only temporary. And, they're problematic, and Vedic ritualism causes so much violence. And there was a litany of reasons why these two alternative proposals as to how to solve suffering were inadequate and insufficient. But essentially, they're temporary. Okay? So then the text said, well, if you really want to stop suffering, you have to know the relationships and differences between the manifest, unmanifest, and the Purusha. Unmanifest is the term for Prakriti. Although in this text, it tends to be called pradhana. So write down Prakriti equals pradhana. Okay? So those were the first three sutras. And therefore, this text is going to teach us about the distinction between those three things. And remember, in the Gita, the Samkhya is called Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. And yoga is a branch of Samkhya in the ancient period, before the formation of the so-called six schools that we now find in our Introduction to Hindu Philosophy books. We find these six compartmentalized schools. And I mentioned last time that's all a bit of a fiction. There's so many more than six schools. But nonetheless, the Gita and the older texts, they consider them to be the same, yoga and Samkhya. So Samkhya deals more with the metaphysics. What is the manifest and what is the unmanifest? Okay, and then yoga deals more with a method. What's the method of extricating the Purusha? And of course, we know that's to be Chittavritti Nirodha, the grand finale, in preparation for which we have the Kriya Yoga, which sort of then resurfaces within the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs. Okay, enough said about all that. So now we'll with that behind us, the verse 4. Most schools at the beginning of their expositions, right, because they're claiming to present knowledge, right? The very first verse of this text is, because of these suffering, there arises a desire to know. So then the first thing schools have to do, or, at some point, but usually at the beginning of their treatises, is say, well, what are the sources of knowledge that we accept? Okay, you say that the solution is knowledge, but how do we gain knowledge? What are the sources of knowledge? It's called epistemology. if you want to write down a fancy term that's used in philosophy and study religion, epistemology, or Greek term, or maybe you think you got enough in your hands with Sanskrit without adding classical Greek. So, but that's the term, epistemology. Why not? Expand our vocabulary. So now having established what the text is about, it's about solving suffering, and the way to solve that is to know the difference between the manifest, the unmanifest, and the Purusha. Having established that, well, then what are the means to knowledge? Sutra Karika number 4, page 51, translation in the middle. The means of valid knowledge, are recognized to be threefold. Same as Patanjali. He puts it right in the beginning as well. He says, Yogaschitta Vittinarodha tells us what it is. Tada drashtu sarupe vastanam, that, you know, that the grand finale goal is an experience of pure consciousness. Vritti sarupya mitaratra, otherwise you're trapped in the vrittis, and vittaya panchatayaha, 5 vrittis, and bang. Immediately then he establishes, and what are the 5 vrittis? Pramana. The first is right knowledge. So almost always at the beginning of an exposition, it is incumbent upon a school to establish what sources of valid knowledge do they accept. They're going to talk about knowledge, well and good. But what sources of knowledge do they accept then? How do we get this knowledge? Through what means? Through what instruments? Through what methods? So just like yoga, then Samkhya, given they're the same school, accept 3 sources of valid knowledge. And verse number 4, the means of valid knowledge are recognized to be threefold: perception, pratyaksha, inference, anumana, and valid testimony, words. Patanjali calls it agama. You could call it shastra. You could call it shruti. There's lots of words, but it's knowledge received through words. Valid. Of course, there's all kinds of a discussion about what makes it valid or not, but we start off with a baseline definition. These are the 3 ways of accepting valid knowledge, and probably still apply to our day and age. We know things because we see things. We know things because we make inferences, but most of what we know, we just get from words, from the television, from our, university, from our lectures in university. Most of the knowledge that we receive from newspapers, nowadays from computer. So we this is not something archaic. This is totally applicable to how do we get knowledge then? So, right. So Samkhya accepts 3, since all other means of correct knowledge are comprehended in these 3. If you want to say, well, what about memory? Isn't that a way of valid knowledge? Or what about comparison? Or what about, you compare one thing to another? So any other proposal that could be made in terms of, well, there's other ways of gaining right knowledge, Sankhya Yoga would say, would not deny that, but would say, but they can actually fit into one of these 3. We don't need to make extra categories. Remember, philosophy is about keeping as few categories as possible. This holds good for ancient India as it does for Western philosophy. We've all heard of Occam's razor. What's Occam's razor? The few presuppositions you have to make, the better your argument is. If you make an argument, say, well, this could be the case if this, and then if this, and then if this, and then if this, and if you have 108 ifs, how strong of an argument is it? Whereas if you just say, well, this could be the case if, and then 1, well, that's a stronger argument then. So the fewer unnecessary bits and pieces, it's called Occam's razor because of the great Christian theologian Occam in the West. Nowadays we call it. In India, it's called lagutva, lightness. Lagu is light. So the less unnecessary postulates you make, the less hypotheticals you have to introduce, obviously the stronger your argument is. So what is he saying here? He's saying, since all other means of correct knowledge, other than these 3, that because some schools say there's 4 modes of correct knowledge, some say 5, some say 6, as we'll see in the commentary, but these are all comprehended in these 3. They're just subcategories of these 3. They don't need to be presented as separate sources of knowledge. Okay, that's the verse. Correct knowledge of the matter to be known right? If you want to know something, the Atman know anything, Bhagavan, all this lofty philosophy, you claiming to present knowledge of this, that, and the other. Well and good. So correct knowledge of the matter to be known, of any matter, but it depends on the means of valid knowledge. To know something, you first have to be, you have to make a statement about what are the means of knowledge. Okay, so that's what that's all about. And we'll go back to the commentary, which would be at the bottom of page 48. This is the Bhasha. Bhasha is to speak, to say. So to comment. Right? Because, these sutras why are they so short? Because they have to be memorized. And if you're memorizing everything, but then the comment, but you can't read them without commentary. Now, by which and with how many means of knowledge? Okay, now this is Gaudapada, the commentator. He sets off, okay, in the bottom of page 49, Bhasha, 6 lines in the bottom. Now, by which and with how many means of knowledge are these 3 objects, the manifest, the unmanifest, and the knower, are established? Remember, the first 3 Karikas made the statement that to be free of suffering, you have to know these 3 things. So established, just like Patanjali did, yoga is this. So Sāṃkhya establishes this is what we need to know to be free of suffering. So now the question is, how do we know those 3 things? What are our sources of, how do we gain knowledge of these 3? Let's accept that if I know these 3 things, I'll be free of suffering. Fair, well and good, fine. Let's accept that as a hypothesis. But how do we know these 3 things? Okay. So in this world, an object to be known is to be established through a means of valid knowledge. Just like rice is known by prashta, measure. So how do you measure? Prashta is a weight. Let's say, a pound or an ounce. So how do you know rice? Well, you know it by measuring it. You want a pound of rice. Well, how do you know it's a pound of rice? Well, you have to have a method. Well, okay, then you have a prashta. You have a stone that weighs a certain amount. And he's just giving a mundane example. So just as, rice is known by a prashta and sandalwood and the like by a balance, sandalwood's actually very expensive if you buy genuine sandalwood, not the stuff they rip off, that you all get ripped off if you go to day. If someone's selling you cheap sandalwood, it's rubbish, my friends. All that stuff you buy on the streets in Delhi or even in Vrindavan, the sacred, there's none of it's real sandalwood. Real sandalwood costs a penny or 2. But how do you know sandalwood? By a balance. So just giving an example. Therefore, the means of valid knowledge is to be described. How are we going to know these 3 things? Keep your eye on the ball, okay? This text is about 3 things. Manifest, unmanifest, manifest, and the Purusha. Perception, the first means. The ear, the skin, the eye, the tongue, and the nose are the 5 organs of sense. Intellect. Now, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell are the objects of these, the qualities, the tammatras of these 5, in this very order, right? Because sound is the most sattvic. The ear comprehends sound, the skin touch, the tongue taste, the nose smell, the means of right cognition. This means is termed perception. So when these senses, 5 of them, are interacted, each has their unique quality that they can know. The nose can only know smell. It can't know sound. The ear can know sound. Okay, so one way of knowing is through these 5 senses. Prati aksha. Aksha is the eye. When you have a well-known list, you only give the first member. Everybody knows the list. You don't have to spell it out, okay? This is what perception is. Now, Nyaya, another tradition, elaborates on this. I don't know if you're interested in what perception is in Nyaya. Nyaya are actually the logicians of ancient India. Samkhya they're not really logicians, they're metaphysicians. And Vedanta, they use logic and so forth. Vedanta is really a scriptural exegesis. They interpret the scriptures. But there is a school that just dedicates itself to Nyaya, and they expand on this definition of valid sense perception. I don't know if you're interested, but I'll assume you're not. So
yes,
you're interested. Okay, Nyaya says there's 4 conditions for sense perception to be valid. Any of the 5 senses. Number 1, it depends on the contact, which is what he's saying here. the contact of a sense with a sense object. So that is an agreement with Sāṃkhya. But Nyaya adds three other things. It does not depend on language. It doesn't matter whether you know the name of a thing or not. You can still perceive it, even if you've never seen it before, you don't know what it is, you don't know its name. Sense perception is not dependent on language. And that's important because some Buddhist schools are going to say the whole that actually, well, there's even a Buddhist school that say there isn't any external world at all. There are no sense object. It's all just mental, it's all language being projected. So Nyaya wants to eliminate that our perceptions are really conceptual reifications, that our concepts become in our mind reified and we think there's a world out there when actually there isn't. So they're going to say, no, they're Nyaya realists. There's a real world out there and perception doesn't depend on language. They're going to say that. Number three, it's going to be inerrant. If it's valid sense perception, because you have to eliminate error. What about error? What if I see a snake, a rope, and it's a snake? So how do you eliminate error from valid? Remember, this is valid knowledge. We're talking about valid knowledge, not just perceptions. We're talking about valid knowledge. That means valid perception, valid inference, valid words. So how then you have to separate, well, what distinguishes valid perception from erroneous perception? And the famous example of the rope looks like a snake from a distance. So therefore, Nyaya says, well, for it to be valid sense perception, it has to be inerrant. It doesn't err. It's not wrong. You go and pick it up and it is a rope. How do you know? Well, how do you know? Because it works. If you think it's a snake, you run away. But if it's valid knowledge, they're practical. They're practical. The Nyayikas, they say, well, it works. How do you know there's a door there? Well, you walk through it. If it was an error, you'd smash your face on the wall. So the second condition, the third condition is inerrant. Okay, what is sense perception? Contact of the eye with a sense object, number one. Number two, doesn't depend on language. This is not I'm adding this now. I'm not going to do this very often because we've got enough on our hands here with Sāṃkhya. But just so for your information, Nyaya, right, one of the 6 schools, have 3 more conditions in addition to the contact of sense and sense object. Second one is, doesn't depend on language. Maybe you don't know what it is. Maybe you don't know what it's called, but sense perception will still work. You might puzzle about what the heck is that? Like that obelisk in the desert, somebody stuck there. You'd be like, what is that? But you still perceive it. Number 3, it's inerrant. If it's valid sense perception, it's not an error. And number 4, it's definitive. Why did they add that? Well, because error is one thing they need to eliminate. The other thing they need to eliminate is confusion. What if and here's the example. There's a post 100 yards away from you, and it's 6 foot high and 1 foot wide. So it looks like a man or a woman. So then the question arises, maybe it's a bit dark and it's a bit of a distance. So is it a post? Is it a man or a woman? So there's doubt. So valid sense perception, there's no doubt. So then you see it move and oh no, it's not a post, it's a person. Okay? Right, so this is Indian philosophy, my friends. It's a little tapas, but why not? What else are we going to do with our minds? And remember what Krishna says in the Gita, Jnana tapas. He's worshipped by the Jnana tapas. This is a tapas. So there we have perception, okay? And so now the next thing, about 5 lines down on 49. An object that is not comprehended by perception or inference is apprehended by valid testimony. He hasn't discussed inference, so he'll discuss inference in a minute. But something that inferences also depend on perception. I'll give you the classic example of an inference, right? So the first is perception, and we're clear with it. We've done with that now, okay? Number 1, finished with that. Right, now number 2 is inference. He's going to discuss it, but I'll just do a quickie. I'll just give you a quick preamble. Inference is also based on a perception of a sign called a linga, which is the sign of something else, and you infer the presence of something else. Example, You see smoke and you infer there's only one explanation for smoke. There must be a fire. There's no other explanation. For an inference to be valid, there has to be no other explanation. So what is that? What's inference? What causes inference? The linga, the sign. The fire is inferred from its sign, its linga. The fire is the lingin, possessor of the sign. The linga is the sign. The sign meaning that's the telltale sign. If there's smoke, there's going to be fire as its cause, but you don't see the fire. That's why it doesn't come under perception. You know the fire, but not because of perception. If you saw the fire, it will be the first means of knowledge, sense perception. But the second means of knowledge, even though it's based on the perception of something, the smoke, it's not based on the perception of the fire. So it's not in the same category. And therefore, you infer the existence of fire from the perception of smoke. Right. He's going to discuss that. So we'll get back to that. If you didn't quite get that, we'll have another couple of rounds through that. Now the next thing he says in the commentary, that an object that is not comprehended by either perception or inference, so you don't see it, nor do you infer it from some other sign, is apprehended by valid testimony, words. Okay? As for instance, Indra is the king of Goda, of the gods. How do we know Indra is the king of the gods, the celestial? We don't see that. You can't infer that. Could be Zeus, could be Thor, could be anybody, could be Winnie the Pooh. So how do you know it's Indra, right? Well, only from the scriptures tell us that. That's not something that you could ever know by the other two means of knowledge. Or, for example, yeah, okay. And there is the land of the Uttara Kurus. How would you know that unless you'd been there? Okay, so these are or there are nymphs in the heavens. Sorry, that's not a nice word, but there are celestial ladies in the heaven, in the celestial realms. How do you know any of that? Only from words. So unapprehended by perception and inference, so that which is not known by perception and inference is apprehended by valid testimony, the third way. All okay? Everybody following all right? Give me a thumbs up. Oh, good. Okay. So something is called valid. Well, what makes it valid? On account of the freedom from blemishes and faults. There's no blemishes. It's not indefinite. There's no confusion. Is it a post? Is it a man? There's no faults. With faults destroyed altogether. Oh, no, hang on. Now he's talking about verbal testimony. I'm sorry. What makes somebody a valid testament? What makes somebody a reliable authority? Well, the freedom from blemishes and faults. With faults destroyed altogether, no one will lie. So therefore, either an enlightened being or a highly cultured person who rigidly follows dharma. So with faults destroyed altogether, no one will lie, because otherwise someone could lie. You could say, well, how do I know the words are true? Well, it could be, what if he's lying? So, but with faults destroyed altogether, no one will lie on account of the absence of a reason. Why they would have no reason to lie. When people lie, they're trying to gain something. There's some selfishness there. They're trying to gain something, right? Fake news. So that person is to be regarded as valid. Who's to be regarded as valid? This is the third source of knowledge. Who is engaged in his own duties, very dharmic, righteous, is free from attachment and hatred, raga, dvesha. So maybe not an enlightened being, quite precisely, maybe not a bodhisattva or a jivan mukta. Obviously, they're reliable, but even someone that's just dharmic, free from raga, dvesha, and is always respected by persons of this description and is recognized as such by others. Okay, so these are the criteria, right? Just as we have in our society, right? We have, we expect our judges and maybe not our politicians, but we expect our professors and our judges, and there's certain people in society we sort of expect to have integrity. And if that fails, then the society is just, if the judges get corrupt, then it's all over, as we are aware at our present moment. So likewise back then, they had what they call apta vachana. the righteous people. So, okay, right. Is always respected. In these three means of right cognition are included all the other means of right knowledge. What does it mean by that? Because some people propose 4 means, 5 means. Like according to Jaimini, for example, Jaimini is the author of Mimamsa Sutra. Another one of the 6 schools is Mimamsa, and the author of that is Jaimini, just like the author of the Yoga Sutras is Patanjali. So according to Jaimini, there are 6 means of right knowledge. Now, I'm not going to get into all this. He discusses the 6. Because we don't have time, my friends. We're only on verse 4. There's 70-something verses. We have to decide. We're going to have to jump a little bit. And there's going to be a lot of work for not much return. We'll just jump over to 50. But basically, he argues that these extra means that Jaimini proposes, really, it's not that he rejects them as sources of knowledge. He accepts them as sources of knowledge, but he says, you know what, we can accommodate them within these three that Samkhya accepts: perception, inference, and argument. So therefore, if you go over to page 50, 5 lines down, these 6 means of right cognition, 4 lines down, are included in the 3. So the bit we missed is his arguments for saying, well, they're not really different from, we can fit them, here they are, perception and the rest. So here are the extra ones that Jaimini proposed. Thus, presumption is included in inference. Gaudapada says, it's just a type of inference. We don't need to say it's something separate. And these other means of knowledge, probability, negation, imagination, and tradition, these are all types of valid testimony. Says Gaudapada, we don't need to, they don't need to be separate. We don't need to clutter up our epistemology with all these categories. 3 is enough. All these other things, we can fit them into these 3. Do you get the point? Is everybody getting the point? See, this is one of the online teaching has lots of advantages. I find I'm much more focused when I teach online, but the disadvantage is that I can't get a sense that you would do if we're all in a room. You get a sense of people are getting it or not getting it. So, well, let's just go with it, okay? So therefore, since all means of right cognition, right, we're on page 50. Ari, you got the text? Where's Ari? I just saw Ari. You got the text. You downloaded it, right? Ari's a great Sanskrit scholar. He's a great Sanskrit scholar, up and coming. He's in our Sanskrit course at Rutgers. There he is. Ari Colaprese. So, these 6 means of right cognition are included in the 3, perception and the rest. By the way, Ari, we have a tradition in our Sanskrit classes that our first-year students, when they're done, just like Stephen is mentoring you ex overtime, we encourage our students to mentor the beginners, because let me tell you, my friend, it's the best way of learning when you have to teach somebody else. So there may be some folks in the yoga community who might be interested in learning Sanskrit. So I'm going to be offering you all the opportunity to, mentor them a bit next year. I just put you on the spot in front of everybody. So these 6 means of right knowledge are included in the 3: perception, inference, and verbal testimony. Oh, we just read that. As the next sentence. Therefore, since all the means of right cognition are established in the 3, only 3 other means of valid knowledge recognized. And other schools would argue, by the way, they'll make their case for 4, they'll make their case for 6, and they'll make whatever cases they're going to make, right? So clearly, they're all philosophers. They're not just going to let somebody tell them, no, they're going to resist. They're going to argue their own cases, and that's fine. That's what philosophers do. But Samkhya accepts 3. This means that by these 3 means of knowledge, other means of knowledge are established, and everything else fits into them. Things to be known are to be established through the valid means of right knowledge. You want to know something? You got to first decide, how do you know it? How are you going to establish its truth? Through the senses, through inference, or through words? One of those 3. Things to be known. What are the things to be known? Nature, Prakriti. Buddhi, intellect. Ahamkara, ego, the 5 tanmatra subtle elements. the 11 karmindriyas and gyanindriyas, the 11 indriyas, is 10 indriyas rather, the 5 gross elements, the mahabhutas, and he puts spirit here, awful word, but that's whenever he has spirit, you might want to make a note of this. If you read this, you might like to prepare. One or two of you might. If you're really interested in this, prepare for next week. Even if 2 or 3 of you do, good luck to you. So he has spirit, the word in Sanskrit is Purusha. Where he has nature, he's referring to Prakriti. Okay, I'm going to guess this is written in the 1920s, 100 years ago. So it has that, kind of archaic British English. I'm guessing that. I might be wrong. It might be 70s. I don't know. I meant to check and I forgot. So these 25 principles are spoken of. And if you put them all together, what are they? The manifest, the unmanifest, and the knower, which is how we started in verse number 2 and 3. Karika number 2 and 3. Again, the unmanifest is Prakriti. Manifest is when things start to emerge, beginning with Buddhi. The things start to manifest out of Prakriti. So the manifest is when creation has begun. The gunas have stirred and evolutes are emanating forth. That's the manifest. The unmanifest is before that, prior to creation. The 3 gunas are just in balance. Here's a nice word, equitension. The equitension. In other words, what does that mean is tamas is neutralizing rajas. The minute rajas gets a little bit agitated, then creation, remember all creation is rajas, stirring, takes movement to stir the evolutes, just like it takes movement to get to manifest yogurt from milk. You've got to churn the milk, and then you have to churn the yogurt to get butter. So think of it as churning. And even Patanjali uses the term vritti for the gunas, guna vritti. Uses it for the mind, he uses it for the prana, but he also uses it for the gunas. So there we have it. So of these, some are to, I jumped something. This is important. These 25 principles are spoken of as the manifest, the unmanifest, and the knower. Of these, some are to be established through perception, like the only ones you establish, like the mahabhutas and the tanmatras. Actually the qualities you perceive, the qualities. You don't actually see the atoms. So the qualities you see. So some of them are established through perception, right? We see color, we feel texture, we smell smells. Some through inference, like the mind and intelligence. We don't perceive it, but we infer that. And some through valid testimony. Thus have been explained the 3 means of valid cognition. All right, Karika number 4. Moving on to 5, bottom of page 54. Right at the bottom, 54. Perception is the ascertainment of objects through the contact of the sense organs. A sense organ contacts an object, right? So how do I know the world is there? Because it's solid. I put my hand on the table, it's solid, but that's actually sense perception. Solidity is sense perception. And so on. Again, Nyaya gets into these categories, and Samkhya has 5 qualities. Nyaya has 16 and eventually end up with 24. So anyway, what is it? Perception is the ascertainment of the objects through the contact of the sense organs. So I know I can smell something, so I know something because I smell it. I know something because I hear it. I know, right? Remember, it's all about how do I know things. And in order to be free of suffering, I have to have knowledge, ultimate knowledge. But let's start off with just regular knowledge. Okay. So inference is said to be, okay. Now, so that's perception. Now, inference is said to be of 3 kinds. There's 3 kinds of inferences. And is the result of the knowledge of the linga, the characteristic mark, and the lingi. The linga is the smoke. It's the characteristic mark. It's the telltale sign. Linga means a sign. The Shiva Linga, you've all heard of the Shiva Linga, the phallic, aniconic form of Lord Shiva. That's a sign. It's called a linga. It's a sign. And that's, by the way, linga means gender. Gender. How do you know whether a man or a woman? Well, it's Pulinga or Strilinga. It has the marks of a man or the marks of a woman. When you have a little baby's born, you look, right? You see, what does it have? The marks of a male or marks of a female? That's also called a linga. So the linga is a sign of something else. So the sexual organs are the sign of gender. Same word, linga. So therefore, that's inferences based on the linga. The linga is a sign of something else. Because if you could see the other thing, then you wouldn't need to make an inference. You just see it. If you could see it, you could see it. Don't need to make an inference. If you see the fire, that's perception. But if you don't see it and you see a sign of it, that's when an inference kicks in Hindu logic. And that's called a linga. And the thing which possesses the linga, the fire, is the lingin or lingi, just like yogin. And yogini is the possessor of yoga. So we're yogis or yoginis, that ending e or in or ini is a possessive case. If you put in or e on the end of a noun, it means you possess it. So yogin, yogini, vivekin. We have Vivekin in the Yoga Sutras. So the characteristic mark in the lingi. So the possessor of this mark. So he's talking now, he's discussing all three sources of knowledge. The previous verse, he establishes what they are. And this verse now, he's going to talk a little bit more detail about them. So what's sense perception? Contact of a sense and a sense object. What's inference? It's a linga, which is the sign of the lingin, a sign of something else. Okay, smoke, sign of something else, fire. And the third thing is the valid testimony is true revelation and a right assertion. True, has to be true. All of these are true. If false perception is error, it's not right knowledge. Making bad inference is error, not right knowledge. Getting fake news is error, not right knowledge. So we're talking about right knowledge now. How do we get it? Through these three sources. Over to the Bhasha, page 52. Now the definitions of each are given. Drushta, Patanjali has this. I bet some of you know, verse 12 or 13 or 14. Drishta anushravika vishaya vitrishnasya vashikara samkhya vaitrishna. There's the Vairagya verse. What's Vairagya? Drishta anushravika vishaya vitrishnasya. Right? Someone who's, anyway, drishta. Drishta is the scene. It's another word for pratyaksha. Perception is the application of exertion. And of course, the Sāṃkhya doesn't get into it, but other traditions talk about the pranas, and some traditions talk about the 10 pranas, which support the 10 indriyas. So there's a different prana for each sense. And some other traditions don't use the word prana, they use the word shakti. You need to know this about Hinduism. Just because you know one school which uses a set of terminologies, other schools are going to use different terminologies, and they may even be talking about more or less the same thing. So one school talks about the 10 pranas underpinning the functions of the karma indriyas, the gyan indriyas, the senses. Other schools talk about shaktis. And why can't they be the same thing? Because a prana is a shakti. A prana, a life air, is a power. But anyway, just so you know. So he's not getting into physiology here. You get a lot more physiology in the Tantrika traditions than you do in Samkhya or Vedanta, who are not so interested in the body. So therefore, they're not going to exhaustively analyze all the subtle physiologies. Not that they reject it, it's just not their thing. Right. Inference, now 2 lines down. 3 lines down. Is there 3 kinds? They again, divide all the inferences you can make they say, well, basically we can fit them into three kinds of categories. Remember, philosophy is about the least categories you make, the better your philosophy is. If inferences of three kinds, subsequent, antecedent, and analogous, we'll explain them. Hold your horses. So the first one, subsequent, purvavat, like the previous, is that which has an antecedent, a cause. So okay, let's have the example. It'll quickly become clear. So just as on account of the rising clouds, rain is inferred. So you see something previous. So you see dark rain clouds. So that's previous. And you infer there will be rain. So the first kind of inference is based on seeing something before the inference you're going to make. It's called purvavat. Purva means like purva paksha. Purva means the other, but it can also mean before. So that's one kind of inference based on an antecedent, right? Dark rain clouds, and you infer, therefore, it is going to rain. Let's go home. That's one kind of inference based on prior perception. The sign, remember, inference is based on one thing is a sign of another thing. Smoke is the sign. It's based on sense perception, but you're not seeing the actual thing you're inferring. You're seeing a sign of it. So then the sign you're seeing in this first kind of inference is something that precedes the thing you're inferring. It goes before it. So dark rain clouds precede rain. It's called purvavat. They precede it. Okay. Sheshavat, he defines it differently here, but normally it's the opposite. Afterwards. So he's not giving this example, but I'll give it because this is much more standard. You see, I live next to a river here, right on my property, and there's, you can pretty much walk across it. It's 2 feet, not more than 2 feet high. But when it rains, it's a gushing torrent. So I go out and I see the river that I know. Right, me being anybody, the river that what it normally it's just not very high, and then you go out, maybe you've slept, you've slept all night, you go out in the morning, you see the river is really, really, really high, and you infer that it has rained. But the inference is based on after, not before. The rain clouds are before the rain, the high river after the rain. Maybe it's not raining anymore. So this is called sheshavat. So one inference is you infer something based on prior conditions that can only be explained one way. And this, the second one, sheshavat, is based on after conditions, post conditions, called sheshavat. But there's another way of taking sheshavat, which is is that clear? Do you enjoy this?
Yes.
Yes, honestly?
Yes.
Because there are other kinds of verses. If these are, this is Sāṃkhya Kārikās.
Don't worry.
Oh, I'm
yes,
always
very much.
Okay, let's keep going. So the way he takes this sheshavat, the second one, which is more typically like after the after effects, is that just as when one finding a pala of water from the sea to be saltish, one infers that the rest of the water is saltish. He's taking it as you take one drop of water and it's saltish, and then from that one drop you infer well, the whole ocean therefore must be salt. He's taking that to be that kind of an inference, that from a part you know the whole. Shesha means that shesha can also means that which is left over. So if I take a drop of the salty seawater and it's salt, I take a drop of water from the sea and it's salty, then that which is left over, the whole ocean, must also be salty. That's another kind of inference. Moving on to the third. It's called samanyato drishta, commonality. Right? Those that are not common. The rain clouds are not the same as the rain. They precursors of it and indicators of it and the sign of it, but they're not the rain, they're not the same. And likewise, but this is the sameness, samanyataha. If those of you don't know the Gita, how is yoga defined? Samaha yoga muchyate samaha, equanimity, sameness. Yes, 248. Samaha yoga muchyate. So this is the same word, samanyato drishta. Just as when the moon and the stars are observed to move from one place to another, one infers their movement. What does this mean? You see the moon, look out the window, it's on your left. And 2 hours later, you look out the window and it's all the way to your right. Same moon. It's the same. That's why it's samanyata. It's not one thing. It's not that you're making an inference about one thing from a different thing, like smoke and fire. They're different. This is the same thing. The moon was over here. 3 hours later, it's over there. Same thing, but it's not in the same place. So it must have moved. So that kind of an inference, where you're dealing with the same thing, samanyato, it's called exactly that, samanyato drishta. Just as when the moon and the stars are observed, we just did that. Or another example, just as one observes Chaitra. By the way, there's, whenever you want to talk about, what do we say in the States? John Doe, is it John Doe? Like Mr. You want to just refer to anybody. Is it John Doe?
Yes.
John Doe. In England, you might say Joe Bloggs. You say Joe Bloggs. It's a stand-in for anybody. So in Indian philosophy, you say Chaitra or Mitra, or Deva, or there's 3 or 4 names. There's Deva Mitra. It just means anybody. And when you want to talk about an object out there, you just say a pot. So the pot, Devadatta. Thank you. It's Devadatta. And Vishnu Priya. Deva's set 2 or 3 names. Here it's Chaitra. So when you wanted to refer to, write this down actually, because we'll run into this. When you want to just refer to an object of perception, obviously you can't list everything in out there, tables and chairs and mountains and planets. You just say the pot. Let the pot represent an object of perception. So make a note of that, the pot, kamba. So just as when one observes Chaitra leaving one place and reaching another, so samanyata is the same Chaitra, so one infers that Chaitra's movement, same as the moon, nothing mind-boggling about that. So the moon and the stars have movement, just like Chaitra. So Chaitra is an example. So similarly, having seen the mango, and here's another way of working this samanyata, this third kind of inference, a bit like the drop of water and the ocean, similar to that. Having seen the mango trees in blossom in one place, one infers that mango trees have blossomed elsewhere too. This is samanyato drishta. This is the common, right? So you go to Central Park, and the Japanese, the maples have blossomed, and then you assume that they're going to blossom in some other park at the same place, same sort of geographical area. So that's just called samanya, based on commonality. That's all. Again, inference 5 from the bottom is that which is preceded by the knowledge of. Again, he's repeating it, but it's all good. Repetition of the linga and the lingin. Linga is the sign. Lingin is the thing that possesses the sign that you can't perceive, but you infer it's there from the linga. From the linga, you infer the lingin. From the smoke, linga, you infer the possessor of smoke, lingin, fire. So then this middle and major term, he's put that in. Gaudapada is not going to be talking about Aristotelian logic. The translator, Mr. Manikar, puts in this middle and minor term, right? What's the major term? All men are mortals. What's the minor term? Socrates is a man. So what's the middle term? Man. I don't know why you put that in there. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This is a Greek inference. It's a little bit different, but anyway, I don't know. So that's what that business is there, the middle and the major term. Right. Preceded by the linga, where through the linga, the lingin is inferred. He's repeating himself, but so do you when you do your downward dog 1,000,000 trillion times, right? Every class, downward dog. Next class, downward dog. Is that enough already with the downward dog? Downward dog. Repetition is good. With these downward dogs. Then you push on the inside of the hand, and you're going to pull up your inside thigh, and you're going to pull up your kneecap. So there's always a little bit of difference. And each time, of course, well, what's the point? Each time you go deeper and deeper, and you realize something about, you have some realization on your anatomy that you didn't have before if you're doing real asana. It's the same with study. Don't ever think it's repetitive. Repetition is a flaw, perhaps in certain kinds of writing, but not in philosophical discourse. Because each time you encounter that, you go deeper and deeper and deeper. The idea of philosophy is to go deep. Whereas in poetic literature, and Sanskrit has very, very rich poetic traditions called kavya, then repetition is a flaw. Because kavya is about aesthetics and onomatopoeia and conjuring up, beautiful images and psychological development, with Krishna and the gopis. That's different, but not philosophical literature. It's repetitive because it's not something you engage aesthetically. It's something that you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into. As anyone that has a svadhyaya practice knows that. Every time you read the Gita, you read a verse, you may have read it a 1,000 times, and one day it reveals itself, just like a pose. All right, enough of that. So preceded by the linga, where through the linga, the lingin is inferred. Just as through the staff, a mendicant, when you see the staff of the sannyasi, right, you have a staff which is the sign of the sannyasi, the fourth order of life, the renunciate. If you see the staff, then you know there's a sannyasi around. So just as through the staff, a mendicant, preceded by the lingin, where the linga is inferred through the lingin. He's repeating himself. Just as, having seen the men, and the other way around as well. I'm sorry, I missed that. So preceded by the linga, where through the linga, the lingin is inferred, and the other way around, preceded by the lingin, where the linga is inferred. So from the staff, you infer the mendicant, and the other way around works as well. If you see the mendicant or an authentic sannyasi with the sacred clay, you know he has to have a staff, maybe put it down. So from the mendicant, you infer the staff, the danda. It's called a danda. The Vaishnavas is tridandi. Ha 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 ha. All of these little tricks. The monists, the Advaitins, they only have one rod in there. The sannyasis only have one rod because everything's one from them. There's only one Brahman. And the Vaishnavas inside, wait, it's wrapped in cloth. You can't see how many rods are in there. Vaishnavas have 3. Because for them, there's God, the world, and the souls. They're different. They're not monists. So they have their tridandi. So you have danda, the dandin and the tridandi. So, okay, there we have it. Just as having seen the mendicant, it is inferred that the triple staff belongs to him. That's a triple staff. Now, so that's how you make an inference, right? So he's discussed perception, contact, sense, to sense objects, discussed inference, 3 kinds. From a preceding sign, from an after effect sign, posterior, right? So preceding, dark clouds infer rain, dark clouds precede. Posterior, swollen river, afterwards, you infer there has been in the past rain, that's the second. Or you can go with the drop of ocean is salty, the whole ocean is salty, if you prefer that one. And then commonality. And the examples I give is movement. The same thing is here, then it's there, then it must have moved. There's no other explanation. Now, what about words? Page 53. Up to vachana. Now, vachana are words. Incognate with our English word voice. See the vach? Voice, because English, and some of you have heard me say this a million times, but Sanskrit is Indo-European, belongs to the same language family as English is Germanic. So Sanskrit is the oldest language. English goes back to Germanic, which is not very old at all. Goes back to, I don't know, Beowulf or something. It's the oldest English we have, but very, very recent compared to Vedic Sanskrit, 2,000-3,000 BCE. But anyway, still is the common language. So you see the words are the same. So vach and voice with a V and the C and a vowel in the middle. So apta means appropriate. It has to be right knowledge. Can't just be any fake news. It's got to be apta. Apta means suitable or fitting or right. So Aptavachana has been said. What's Aptavachana then? Well, valid teachers and valid scriptures. They get a bit nasty. They get a bit nasty sometimes. So they have a go at the Buddhist scriptures and say, "Nah, these Buddhist scriptures, they're not valid. They're not Aptavachana." So at this point, they often will take a dig at Buddhist scriptures, and they would say those are not genuine scriptures. So there is the polemical kind of aspect to these traditions. Valid teachers, okay? Valid teachers are like, who are they? Brahma. He's the four-headed, he's the first of the celestials. He speaks the Vedas in the beginning of creation. So who could be more authentic than he? He's the first yogi in the yoga tradition. Patanjali says, Anushasanam, he's continuing the teachings. Well, from where? Okay, we found them in the Upanishads, fine. But who's the first yogi? It's Brahma. And we read the story in, I don't know, some workshop. He's sitting on top of the lotus at the beginning of creation. That picture you may have seen coming out of Vishnu's navel, the lotus. And Brahma's the first being. He's not actually created. Consciousness comes, he reactivates his consciousness from the past cycle. And he has no clue who he is, where he is, knows nothing at all. Imagine being born in pitch blackness, no mother, no father, memory erased, not erased, but covered over by tamas from the past cycle. He has no idea, tries to climb down the lotus, can't reach the bottom, and realizes he cannot understand truth by his own powers, even though he's the most intelligent being in the universe. He's so intelligent, his body is not made of the gross elements. It's made of pure buddhi. How about that? How about having a kid with intelligence as pure buddhi? Drive you mad. So anyway, the body is pure buddhi, and he realizes he has no idea about anything. It's pitch black, so he probably doesn't even know he has eyes. And he feels this lotus is swaying, so he knows, so he had the sense of touch is working. But there's no reason he probably didn't know he had ears. Nothing to smell. Can you imagine? And then he hears the word tapaha. And presumably that activates his memory of language from the past cycle, and he understands what that means, and he does tapas. As a result of tapas, then Vishnu reveals himself to him. So he's the first yogi. And then Vishnu says, okay, I want you to, here's your job. Here's your dharma. For this cycle, you create the forms of all living beings. And he also then articulates the Vedas. The Vedas come from Narayana, but they reveal through Brahma. So therefore, Brahma is a valid teacher. That's the whole point. So I just thought you might like that story because some of you do yoga, many of you do yoga, and Brahma is considered to be the first yogi. And there was a treatise called the Hiranyagarbha Samhita. Hiranyagarbha is another name for Brahma, the golden womb. He's born from the womb of Vishnu on this beautiful lotus. So he wrote a Hiranyagarbha Samhita, and that was the first book on yoga, and it gets lost. But then there's a text called the Shashti Tantra, there was some literature called the Shashti Tantra, which has 60 something verses or something, 60 teachings, which was the origin of yoga after Brahma. And then that also gets lost. But it is referred to in some other texts which quote it, and pretty much the content of that is what Patanjali has in Yoga Sutras. All of which is to say that Patanjali's Yoga Sutras does correspond to the Shasti Tantra, this lost 60 teaching text, which is supposed to have been the first kind of proper text on, this is tradition. I don't know, academics might question the whole thing, but that's what they do. All right, but all of which is to say then Brahma is, let's keep our eye on the ball. So who is a valid teacher? People like Brahma. And what are valid scriptures? The Vedas, the Shruti and the Smriti. The Shruti, that which was heard, the Vedas and the Upanishads. And then he doesn't say that here, but everybody accepts the Smriti, that which is remembered. That would be the sutras, the epics, and the Puranas. These are valid sources in the Vedika schools. And of course, the Buddhist school, for them, they would have the teachings of the Buddha. Okay. Thus, the holy teachers in the Veda are called Apta Shruti. That's your Shruti. So Apta Vachana, same thing. Vachana is words, and Shruti is that which is heard, right? You hear words. So you could call it Apta Vachana with 4 lines above, or call it Apta Shruti. Apta means bona fide, genuine, accurate, infallible, reliable. That's Apta. These are the valid testimony. Okay, so that whole then discussion is 3 sources of knowledge, and he's discussed them. If you really want to get into the sources of knowledge, then read Nyaya, the other one of the 6 schools, Nyaya, and they have written the Nyaya Sutras. Verse 5. Oh, we just did that. Oh, that's not bad. Verse 6, page 57. Knowledge of objects that are beyond the reach of the senses are known through inference based on analogy. We just did that. Smoke. The fire is beyond the senses. Maybe it's on the back of the mountain. You don't see it. You're in the front of the mountain, but you see the smoke. So objects that are beyond the reach of the senses, like black matter, the physicists. No one has seen it, but you infer it's there from things that you do perceive. You do perceive certain anomalies, and the only explanation for them is to posit that there's black matter. That's an inference. I don't know much about black matter, but I think I got that right. So knowledge of objects that are beyond the reach of the senses are known through the inference based on analogy, commonality. What is not directly perceived is beyond the senses and is not proved by inference as well, is established through valid testimony. So if you can't see it, you can't infer it. For example, the nature of God. You can't see God unless you're, occasionally yogis have a darshana or a vision, fair enough. You can infer the existence of God, and that's what Nyaya, the logicians, they infer there must be a God, there must be intelligence behind the putting together of the universe, but you don't know the nature of God. So God could be, and Vedanta starts off like this. We don't know what the nature of God is. We can infer there must be an intelligence. That's as far as inference will take you. That's called intelligent design in Western science, actually. Aristotle called it the prime mover. There's different ways of framing it, but there must be something. It's some intelligent thing. But you don't know what it is. It could be a demon. Remember Descartes? He said, well, how do we know what it is? What if it's a demon? How do Or the Vedantins say, well, maybe there's, how do we know there's one God? What if there's 2? So the nature of that supreme being can only be known through revelation, right? If you're a Krishna Bhakta, right? Krishna has a peacock feather and plays a flute and he's blue. What on earth is inferentiable about that? How are you going to make an inference that, oh yes, there must be intelligence behind the universe? Okay, fine, inference. And he's blue and plays a flute. Good luck. Yeah, good luck working that one into a conference on philosophy of religion. That's pure revelation. Right, so let's read the commentary or anything. God of the Old Testament or any certain things can only be known by revelation. He gave the example of Indra, the king of the celestial. He for some reason he likes that example. Verse 55. Well, he likes that example because lots of people are doing Vedic sacrifices. And Indra, out of the 1008 verses of the Rig Veda, a quarter of them are to Indra. So numerically the most. So that means he was the most chanted celestial at the Vedic sacrifice. The second is Agni, gets a 5th. So, but the Bhashya on page 55 to the translation we just read 6. Let's read it. We might jump around a bit. So by inference from analogy of things beyond the senses, the ascertainment of objects existing and transcending the senses, right? So you make inferences about things you can't see. So the nature, remember that's Prakriti, and Purusha are transcendent, beyond sense perceptions. So how do you know there's a Purusha? Keep our eye on the ball. And remember, we have to know this in order to be free of suffering. Just like Patanjali says, how do you get rid of suffering? Heyam dukkam anagatam. Well, what's the hetu? What's the hetu? Drashta drishtayaho samyoga. They're coming together of the sea and the seen. He's saying the same thing. You need viveka. You need knowledge of the seer and the seen. Patanjali is Samkhya. It's just a development from Samkhya that just takes a practical direction, a meditational direction. Metaphysics identical. Presuppositions identical. Yoga is Samkhya. Samkhya is yoga. Even Krishna says, bala. Those who think they're separate are bala, childish, silly, bala. He's being nice, because elsewhere in the Gita he calls people mudha, fools. But he toned it down a bit here. He didn't call them fools. He said, they're bala, they're silly. Mudho na vijanati. The fools don't know me. So, Bharsha. Okay, so the nature and spirit, 3 lines down in the page 55, are transcendent beyond sense perception. Okay, I'm not going to use the word nature and spirit. I'm going to say Prakriti and Purusha. We need to stop colonizing Sanskrit terms that do not have English equivalents. It's just another kind of colonialization, my friends. We need to step out of our box and learn those terms, not force them into our categories when they don't fit. There's nothing corresponding to Prakriti. There's no exact parallel to it in English, in Western theology or metaphysics. And the Atman is not the same as the soul in this tradition. Because the soul in Christianity and in Plato, right? The Christians borrowed Platonic soul. It's the thinking, intellectual being as well as consciousness. That doesn't apply to Purusha. So we cannot use these terms that don't fit. Right? And why should we? Let's all grow up a little bit. It's a multicultural world now. America's on the way down, my friends, and we're the yogis and yoginis, and we're introducing new vocabularies. Okay, so no more nature and spirit. We're going to say Prakriti and Purusha. Now, I'm not just being post-colonial about it. They're metaphysically inadequate terms. I'm saying that as a philosopher. Okay, for the reasons I just gave. So Prakriti and Purusha are transcendent beyond sense perception. So how are they established? They're established by reasoning from analogy. Okay, let's see how the reasoning goes. Since the emergent Mahat, now Mahat is Buddhi. The first thing, that's the manifest. So write this down. Manifest. Okay, remember, to be free of suffering, you need to know the unmanifest, the manifest, and what he calls the spirit, which is Purusha. So the unmanifest in Sanskrit is avyakta. That English translation is okay. I'm not going to object to it. So the avyakta, it is unmanifest. So that's fairly accurate. The vyakta is manifest. The first thing that comes out, that's manifest now. Buddhi is the first thing that comes out. You know your Sāṃkhya chart. So that's manifest. So that Buddhi is known as the Mahat, the great one. Why is it great? Because everything comes out of it. It's pretty great. It's also known as the vyakta, actually. Even though technically everything that comes out is vyakta, but actually everything that comes out is in Buddhi. And then it comes out of Buddhi. So vyakta is the Buddhi. Right. So from analogy, since the mergent, I don't know why he says mergent, well, things merge into it and emerge out of it. Maybe that's what it is. Mahat and the rest, they're possessed of the 3 attributes. Okay, another awful thing. Attributes. He's using that term for gunas. Write this down. Wherever he has attributes, you just need to have a little piece of paper on the side. There's only going to be about 10 or 15 words that we're going to have to, gloss. Where he has attributes, the Sanskrit is guna. So, since the emergent Mahat and the rest are possessed of the 3 gunas, that is, the Prakriti, of which this possessed of the 3 gunas is the effect. Right, so in other words, from qualities you infer a substance. It's basically what he's saying. Qualities that have to inhere in something. Red It doesn't just float around. There's not just redness floating around. Something has to be red, a red shirt. It has to inhere. Inhere means it sort of inheres in. What's a good word for inhere? Is situated in something. So therefore, since we see these gunas or qualities, they must inhere in something. So that's Prakriti. So you infer, you only see red, but you infer that it must be in cotton or in the threads. You don't see the threads, but they can't just have red floating around in space. It's got to be a red, something's got to be red. So that's the logic here. From the gunas, we infer Prakriti. You don't see Prakriti. Of course, you can say, well, we know Prakriti from sacred texts. Fine. But Sāṃkhya is going to say, well, you forget the sacred texts. You can infer it. You don't need sacred texts. You only need sacred texts for things you can't infer. We can infer there must be a Prakriti. Because all of these evolutes, they must inhere in something. That's the argument here. That is the nature. That is Prakriti. What is Prakriti? Of which this possessed of the three attributes is the effect. The gunas are the effect. They're the quality. They're emerging from Prakriti. Or actually they are Prakriti, but they're qualities of Prakriti. And so all of these things emerging must be emerging from something. So therefore we infer there is a thing from which everything emerges. Just like physicists infer there was whatever they infer, some infinite tensively dense big bang moment. Well, I mean, Siegfried can tell us more about that. You infer it. You don't see it. You haven't seen that little whatever that was. You infer it. You infer it because the universe is evolving out. If it's evolving out, well, it must have. If it's evolving outward, actually they thought it was infinite till they discovered it was actually expanding. They thought, well, it was infinite, like Aristotle and the Greeks thought the universe was infinite. It's only the Christians talk about creation because they had to, because it's in the Bible. So they had to take Greek philosophy and make it somehow work around whatever was in the Bible. So they accepted a lot of Aristotle and Plato, but they couldn't accept this infinite universe business because the Bible says in the beginning there was creation. So now they have to, use Greek philosophy to somehow support that. So Big Bang is the same thing, inference. If something is evolving, well, then you just retrace it back then. Well, then at some point it must come from some, and if all the matter that's there, then this initial moment must be some infinitely dense. And I don't want to step outside of my Adhikara, which is I know about, but I'm just giving an example of an inference. So the same with Prakriti, though. That's why I'm making it. So Prakriti, you can infer from its effects that there must be a cause. So that's the argument. Where are we? I lost my page. So there must be a cause from which the emergent Mahat, from Mahat and the rest emerge. So that is Prakriti, of which this possessed of the three attributes is the effect. Now here, how do you infer the Purusha? Since the non-intelligent appears as the intelligent, therefore, there must be something other, here, spirit, a conscious Purusha to superintend it. What is he saying? Well, matter is not intelligent, not conscious. By the way, sometimes they use the term intelligent when they mean it's Chaitana. They should actually use the term consciousness. It gets really confusing with all these terminologies. So matter is unconscious, but it appears conscious. Trees appears conscious, bugs appears conscious, ants appear conscious, you and I appear conscious, but all of our perceived ingredients are unconscious. Our bodies are made of atoms and subatoms and quarks and wherever that all ends up, but that's all unconscious. Where's consciousness come from? Therefore, it must be something other. This is how you infer the existence of an Atman. And by the way, that's still a valid position in the philosophy of religion. Right here at Rutgers, we have several philosophers who argue for a soul. We're using these kinds of arguments that, consciousness cannot be correlated with any known material substance. So therefore it must be non-material. That's all you have to do. You can't use the language of soul because that's theology. If you're going to being a philosopher, you have to wear your philosopher's hat, and then you don't talk about souls or God. You talk about intelligence for God, and you talk about non-material substance for a soul. Consciousness is a non-material property, cannot be correlated with any known material substance. Ergo, it must be non-material. And that's exactly what he's saying here. Look, it's still a totally valid, a live, living argument, just dressed up in different vocabulary in our modern, right here at Rutgers, my colleague and friend, Dean Zimmerman. So there must be, since the non-intelligent, that's matter, Prakriti, meaning non-conscious, sorry for the translation, since it appears as conscious, then there must be something other to account for consciousness, because matter's not conscious. Very simple, and that's an inference. So what's the whole point of this? How do we know Purusha? We infer. We infer there must be something that is the source of consciousness. So there must be something other, a conscious spirit, Purusha, to superintend it. So what else? The manifest is established through direct perception. We don't need to make inferences about tables and chairs, that which is manifest, and trees. So the manifest, remember the three things, unmanifest, manifest, and Purusha. Well, the manifest is established through direct perception or inference, if in case of, we make inferences about it. With that which is not established by perception, and cannot be established through direct perception, I think he means inference there, is established by valid testimony. And here, this is his examples of, I gave the example of Krishna and his flute, but Indra is the king of the gods. How do you know that? He was repeating it again. Did we just read this? Or is he repeating it? Am I reading the same page again?
No. He's
repeating.
He's repeating.
He is repeating.
Okay. So it's like Downward Dog then, right? You do it again. So there we have it. Okay. Just as Indra is the king of the gods. Okay. Indra is the placeholder for Zeus and Thor. They're very similar. First of all, they're Indo-European. By the way, not only the languages are connected, the pantheon is. So in all three cases, we have the king of the gods who is a rain figure. Zeus with, I think, lightning, with Thor certainly with the thunderbolt, and Indra with the thunderbolt. And you have a few remnants of the names. Zeus Pater, in Latin becomes Zeus Pater, becomes Jupiter. Jupiter is just the Romanization of Zeus Pater. And in Sanskrit, it is Dyaus Pitra, which is no longer a significant celestial in India. Even though it becomes Zeus in the Greek and Jupiter, they're huge, important deities. They're cognates, they're the Sanskrit equivalent. The name is the same, Dyaus Pater. You can hear the same, Jupiter, Zeus Pater, the father Zeus, Jupiter, Dyaus Pitra. But the Dyaus Pitra is a very, very minor deity. I think it's mentioned maybe once or twice in the Rig Veda. But just so you know, this world of the celestials with sacrifice that we've heard something about is the Indo-European religion. So we know all about the sacrifices of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the bulls in the fire and all of that. Sanskrit had the same. Fascinating. Okay. So down there, okay. So just as Indra, we did that, we did all that. Okay, now finished. So then you read the notes, and now we go on to translation 7 on page 59. Okay, now here's the point. So you can imagine the Purva Paksha saying, well, we can't see this. Why do you say there's a Prakriti? Why should we believe that? We can't see it. Why do you think why should we accept this Purusha business? We can't see it, prove it. We're empiricists. Right? So you can imagine the Purva Paksha here. Whenever they say things, there's always a Purva Paksha lurking about in the back of their minds or in real life on their intellectual landscape. That's one of the things you do as a philosopher if you study Indian texts. You have to figure out what are the conversations. They're not just randomly saying things. If they're saying something, it's because they're responding to a point of view. The Purva Paksha. So here, things remain imperceptible, right? We can't see things. such as Purusha and Prakriti. Why? Why can't we see them? Well, here's a list of reasons. 1, on account of great distance. 2, or extreme proximity. Can't see it. 3, or there's a defect of the organs. 4, or non-steadiness of the mind. 5, or minute, too small to see, like quarks and muons. 5 or 6, interposition. We'll explain all of this. Something gets in the way, like the wall here. Predominance, right? Like a grain of sand in a beach. It's overwhelmed by other grains of sand. And intermixture, intermixture with the like. That grain of sand is that intermixture and the like. All right, let's go to the Bhasha. He'll explain all that for us. Bottom of page 57. Why can't we see things? You Sāṃkhya people, the Purva might say, you Sāṃkhya people, talk about these invisible Prakriti and invisible Purusha. Why should we accept? We can't see it. So that's the Purva. Now one might urge. Now you know when he says something like that. Now one might urge. You know it is the Eleanor Purva Paksha. How else do you know the Purva Paksha? If it be said, or well, if one were to say. Or like here, now one may urge, right? Usually at the beginning of the commentary, you get rid of the Purva Pakshas first, then you explain the point of view. So one might urge, this Prakriti and Purusha are not perceived, and that which is not perceived in this world does not exist. Hardcore empiricist, plenty of those around in our day and age. Come and see the religion department here, and many scientists are like this, at least in public. Hardcore period, it doesn't exist. Therefore, these two do not exist, this Prakriti and Purusha. Like a second head, nobody's got two heads. If someone walks around saying, I got a second head, and you say, where is it? And you say, well, you can't see it, it's invisible. What are you going to laugh? So he says, like a second head, says the Purva Paksha, or a third hand. It's nonsense. So that's the Purva Paksha. Now, how do we know the Siddhanta? Because here, to this it is to be said. Now you know now the Siddhanta is going to respond to that. Well, to this it is to be said. Before we had no. He's mellowed out a bit since Sutra number 1 and 2. Right? He's not saying no now. Do you remember the no? To this we say no. To this it is to be said. In this world, says now the Sāṃkhya position, things, even when existing, are not perceived. Right here in our empirically verifiable world, there's plenty of things that exist but we can't perceive. Why? Due to 8 causes. So let's see what they are. To explain. Can you? I know how to. I know how to give you all. I know. Hang on. There we are. Participants. Mute all. Taking this radical step here. Right. So in this world, top of 58, objects, even though existing, right, he has to defend now. Why are we believing in this Purusha and Prakriti if we don't see them? Well, in this world, so you give examples of mundane things that are not perceivable. And by that, you at least by doing that, you establish the possibility of things existing even though they're not perceivable. So you give 8 known instances that no one can deny. That's a pretty long list. So in this world, objects, even though existing, are not perceived on account of, well, here they are. Number 1, excessive distance. As for instance, there we are, Chaitra, Maitra, right? Devadatta, Vishnudatta, and usually, but here they are. These are just names. Chaitra, Maitra, and Vishnu Sharma. Well, they're living in other countries. You can't see them. You're going to tell me they don't exist just because you can't see them, right? People in China, do they not exist? There's no one in China because we can't see them. That's the argument. Number 1. Second reason, on account of extreme nearness, as the eye cannot perceive the collyrium, the mascara, right? You can't see the mascara if you're wearing mascara. Can you see your eyelashes? Can't see them because of extreme nearness. Can you see the lens of your eye? 2, on account, the third reason you might not be able to see something, but it still exists, on account of defects of the organs, like if I take my specs off. And he gives the example as the deaf and the blind cannot apprehend sound and form. Or think of an earthworm. It only has 2 senses, touch and taste. So he knows nothing about the world of sight, knows nothing about the world of sound, and knows nothing about the world of smell. Does that mean there are no smells, sights, and sounds? Just because the earthworm doesn't, that's a defect of the senses, or in the case of the earthworm, a lack of senses. So there's another reason. On account of the fourth reason, inattention. Just as a person who is distracted cannot comprehend anything, however neatly explained. I would have to put that on I'm going to share that with my Hindu Phil students or my Sanskrit students. No, that's not true. They're very good students. Ari, very good. I'm very impressed with you all. So, but anyway, you get the point. On account of inattention, like we space out sometimes. Don't you space out when yoga class and the teacher's barking away at orders nonstop, on and on? He's like, shut up already, up with the knee. Oh God, just say one thing. So you can't hear it all, right? So that's inattention. On account of inattention, just as a man we read that, who is distracted, cannot comprehend anything, however neatly explained. If you're not listening, right, that's the fourth thing. On account of minuteness, fifth, like the subatomic particles, they call them anu, the anus, irreducible particles. In the 19th century, they were translated as atoms. So you now, in all of this Sanskrit philosophy, you have this atom. It's incorrect. Because when they translated the text first, it was Newtonian physics at that time. I don't know, Newtonian physics, Siegfried's on our list here. Correct me if I'm wrong, Siegfried, but that went right until the end of the 1900s, early, I don't know, right? So that's when these texts were being translated. At that time, the atom was considered to be irreducible. So they translated the Sanskrit word anu as atom. Now they found that, of course, since then, inside the atom, there's protons and electrons and neutrons, and inside that, there's muons and gluons and a whole bunch of ooons, and God knows what. And now, so therefore, the word atom does not apply. And it's important to note that, because otherwise people read this word atom and think, well, you know, the Greek word atom also means the same thing, irreducible entity. So when they talk about Greek atomists, they're not talking about Newtonian atomists. Yes, strings are now the latest, they're still to be accepted, although they seem to be making a strong presence. They're not normative, and they're not universally accepted yet. Right, so these are the particles. What is the definition of a particle? Irreducible. So we don't want to call them gluons and muons yet, because then they might find, well, hang on a minute, well, a muon is really a string. We're not even going to call them string, because in 50 years' time, oh, hang on a minute, strings are really something else. Whatever is irreducible. Now, in Sāṃkhya, what does that mean, irreducible? Irreducible as an entity unto itself before dissolving into a tanmatra. Remember your Sāṃkhya charts. So therefore, when we talk about irreducible, we don't mean that it's the absolute stop sign. We mean it's irreducible as an individualized entity. If you reduce it, it goes into its subtle substructure of what the Sāṃkhya calls the tanmatra. Pratiprasava, pratiprasava is when it goes back to, all the way back to Prakriti. But yeah, something like that. So why else can't we see things? On account of minuteness, like the particles, right? Though existing in the sky, but they're not seen. Can't see subatomic particles. Why else can't we see things? On account, they're being thorough here. Philosophers can be a little pedantic. We might, if you're not a philosopher, but they're being thorough. You want to make sure your Purva Paksha can't sneak in and sneak in an argument. So you want to say, look, you want to say that we can't defend. You want to challenge our Prakriti and Purusha because we can't see them. What about these 8 things you can't see? So what else? On account of obstruction, just as an object obstructed by a wall, I can't see what's outside my house because it's obstructed. So likewise, the Purusha may be obstructed by avidya, for example, or the kleshas, or the sukshma sharira. Why else? On account of suppression. And what does he mean by that? just as the planets and the asterisms and stars are not visible. Why? Being suppressed by the luster of the sun. So in the day, are we going to say the planets are not there anymore? They just got destroyed overnight? Are we going to say that? Oh, I can't see the planets, so they want to make the Purva Paksha appear foolish. No, of course they're there, but they're obstructed by the luster of the sun. Why else? Finally, on account of the intermixture with the similar. That's another reason you can't find something just as a grain of beans in a heap of the beans. You can't find one bean if it's in a heap of beans. Or a lotus in a, whatever the heck that is, myrobalan. I'd rather go with a Sanskrit than that. Well, somebody want to put in myrobalan in a search engine? Put it in chat. So just like a lotus and a myrobalan, in the heaps of lotuses and myrobalans. Or, for example, a pigeon in a flock of pigeons. You can't see a pigeon because it's in a purple leaf plum. Is that Donya? Oh, it's my friend Donya, who's a fantastic dancer. Orion dancer, Odissi. A pigeon in a flock of pigeons. They are not visible, being mixed with what is similar. Everybody get this point? The point? You see what he's doing here? He wants to de-arm. He wants to neutralize the Purva Paksha. So in this manner, he finishes up. In 8 ways are not seen the objects, even when they exist. Don't come at us, you Purva Pakshin people, and start giving us grief because you say, oh, we can't see Prakriti and Purusha. There's 8 kinds of mundane things you can't see. So they've rejected that method of argumentation. That's the point. So that's verse 7, verse 8. So what's all this got to do with the suffering? The removal of which requires knowledge of these 3 things? Well, first of all, you have to establish that there are these 3 things, if that's the way to remove suffering. So you have to argue metaphysics first. So therefore, verse number 8, the original principle, this Prakriti, is not seen on account of its subtlety. One of these 8. Which of these 8 applies to the, he's given 8, but they don't all apply to Prakriti and Purusha. Well, which one to apply then? He's given a nice exhaustive list. Well done. Okay, now hone in on what you really want to defend. You're not interested in pigeons in the flock or myrobalans. Well, how do you say that? Myrobalan. Dunya, how do you say that? Myrobalan. Anyway, so what do you really want to defend? He wants to defend Prakriti and Purusha. So the original principle is not seen on account of its subtlety. Not because it doesn't exist. The Purva Paksha wants to say you're not seeing it because it doesn't exist. But the Sāṃkhya wants to say, no, the original principle is not seen on account of its subtlety, not because it doesn't exist, but it is perceived through its effects, just like smoke. You see fire through smoke. You don't perceive it, but you know it. So you know Prakriti through its effects. From these effects, you can infer there is a cause. We call it Prakriti, call it whatever you want, Amagama. Call it anything you want. We call it Prakriti. But it is the cause from the next few verses are going to be all about Satkaryavad. That causes, that effects exist in their causes. Okay. So it is perceived through its effects. What are the effects? Mahat, the intellect, and others are its effects. These things evolve. Well, where are they evolving from? Just like Big Bang. Big Bang is evolving. What was it evolving from? It must have started from somewhere, from something. So it's actually the same argument. Except instead of evolving, the evolving universe, just replace that with the emerging universe. That's not a big conceptual leap. Same argument. It's not archaic philosophy, my friends. Lots of good stuff here. So it's perceived through its effects. Mahat, the intellect, and others are its effects. And they're both like Prakriti, the cause, as well as unlike it. He's going to go on to argue like the clay pot is like the clay because it's clay, but it's unlike it. It has shape, has function, you can drink from it. So it has some commonality, and that's going to be the next couple of verses coming up. So we'll go back and read the commentary. That which is to be ascertained he says any means. I would rather say some means. Thus, what is to be attained by some means does exist. Okay, it does exist, but we have to establish it. How are we going to establish it? Now is to be explained by what reasons is there the non-perception of Prakriti and Purusha? Why is it? Okay, we're saying there's Prakriti and Purusha. You're saying I can't see them. And we're saying, well, that doesn't disqualify the fact that they can exist. Now, what reasons are we going to give? So what now is to be explained by what reasons is there the non-perception? Why is it you can't see them? What reasons is there the non-perception of Prakriti and Purusha? And how can they be not so much perceived, but known? How can they be known? Right, on page 60. This isn't very, also, by the way, there's typos here. It is an old funky translation. Don't worry about it. It's all good. I like old funky translations. So the non-apprehension of Prakriti is due to its mind. It's not minuteness, my friends. He's a little bit of a mistranslation here. It's Sāṃkhya, subtlety. Here he's got the first sentence is that is to say of Prakriti, its non-apprehension, Prakriti's non-apprehension is due to, he's written minuteness. But if you look in the Sanskrit, it says Sāṃkhya, which comes from sukshma, like sukshma sharira. It means subtlety. Not a big problem, but can you cross out minuteness and put subtlety? The nature, remember, the Prakriti, on account of, he's got it right here, on account of its subtle character. I don't know why he likes this minuteness. It's not perceived because it's not minute. It's infinite. So it's mistranslation. It's wrong. I don't know what he had in mind. I don't mean to disrespect Mr. Mainkar. He must have had something in mind when he used this. But subtlety was correct, and he has it correct. But Prakriti is not minute. And Anu is minute. The Anu, the irreducible entity, is minute. Prakriti is infinite. Anyway, so why don't we perceive it? Subtle character. It's not perceived. Just as, for example, in the ether, you notice how they always give examples, mundane examples. If you notice the method here, philosophical exposition, you always give examples, mundane ones, simple ones. So just so that we can conceptualize what he's talking about, rather than some abstract, then you could, oh yeah, pigeons and a flock of pigeons. Okay, then you get the point. Then you go back and then you understand the denser abstract proposition. So it's not perceived. Just as in the ether, third line, the atoms of earth, water, air, fire, whatever, smoke, heat, water, and fire. In the ether, the atoms exist, but they're not perceived. So there's an example of something. He's already given that one. Then how is it to be ascertained? How is it to be known? He's repeating himself. It is to be known through its effects. From the observation of the effects, the cause is inferred. And by the way, Samkhya calls Prakriti, the name it gives is Anumanita, the one which is inferred. They use the term Prakriti, but they also, a synonymous for this school, and they're well known for this, when they refer to Prakriti, they may use the term Prakriti, but they may just use the term the inferred one. And right there, they're in your face telling you what epistemology are they using to claim the existence of Prakriti, the inferred one. It's a valid source of knowledge. Smoke, there's no other explanation from smoke other than fire. Completely 100%, not 99. Give me another explanation for smoke. No other. Therefore, if there's smoke, you have every right to absolutely claim there is fire, though you don't perceive it. So if the Prakriti is anumanita, it is known through inference. So from the observation of the effect, the cause is inferred. 6 lines down. There is Prakriti as the cause, whose effects are all these. If there are effects, there must be a cause. Intellect, ego, and the 5 subtle elements, the 11 organs and 5 gross elements are effects. The 24 things that you see on your charts, they're effects. And these effects are dissimilar to Prakriti. They're similar and also dissimilar. Later on, he's going to argue they're similar in one way, dissimilar in another. So let's get both of those. But now he talks about dissimilar. Smoke is dissimilar from fire. Prakriti means pradhana. There you have it. Okay. When he uses the term pradhana, you're not encountering it because he keeps translating it as nature, nature, nature. But if you're reading the Sanskrit, you wouldn't be reading Prakriti. You wouldn't be finding the term Prakriti as much as you would be finding the term pradhana. That's a synonym for Prakriti. So Prakriti means pradhana, and he translates it as nature, and dissimilar to its effects. To nature, and also similar. So it's both similar and dissimilar, right? So that now we're going to get a couple of verses about similarity. It's both dissimilar and also similar. That is, just like a clay pot is similar and dissimilar. Similar clay, dissimilar, well, it has shape. It has functionality. It serves as a liquid container, so it's also dissimilar. That's going to keep that argument, keep that pot in mind. It's going to totally help you understand the relationship between the avyakta and the vyakta. So it is the same form, just as in the universe, meaning just as in our world, the son is like as well as unlike the father. Maybe he got green eyes and blonde and whatever, black hair, but he is similar, but he's dissimilar. In what respects similar and in what respects dissimilar, we shall explain later on. We'll get to that, he says. Everybody doing all right? Verse 9. And then we're going to get to the Purusha soon. I think where does the Purusha? Purusha is going to be established in verse 10. Where's the Purusha? Verse 11. Now we have to decide what are we going to do with our workshop, my friends. We've got 70-something verses. It's a 4-part series, and we're on verse 10. We can extend the workshop. We can jump around.
Nothing to do with extend the workshop. There's no crossover. No doubt about it.
Extend.
Extend.
You want to read the whole thing?
Yes.
This will speak to state.
All right. Well, anyway, you can send me some emails.
What would you do?
Well, I'm in
I was
school.
married before. I'm divorced. A lot of people, and you also have a son. Do you see this from your son?
Because you could say something really embarrassing, you know.
Can you think harder?
You can let me know. Send me. You can. I don't want a million emails.
Everybody's writing in the chat to you, Edwin, to extend it.
All right. Let's see how we do. All right. By the way, these are going to be harder. I think these are a little bit difficult. These verses. So because he's kind of getting into, he wants to establish the founding presuppositions. Every school has founding presuppositions, right? Big Bang Theory has founding presuppositions. God is a founding presupposition, or at some point you get to a stop sign, and that's your founding presupposition. You can't go beyond that. God, Big Bang, Buddhist, infinite, interdependent flow of momentary reality, whatever it is, you have a foundational presupposition. This school's foundational presupposition, Purusha, Prakriti. By the way, at some point we'll take a moment and we'll see how what the criticism Vedanta has of this. I think you should be interested, because that will be the criticism of the Gita, of all of Vaishnavism, of all of the Bhakti traditions. They have several criticisms, and we'll look at those. Okay, they don't reject Prakriti and Purusha, but they're going to say no. How do the two come together? But let's keep that discussion for another time. We've only got 10 minutes. I'd like to do 9. We got Lakshmi is waiting to do some kirtan for us. 9. Okay. So here are basically Indian philosophy can be divided. All of them, Buddhism, Jainism, can be divided in various ways. But one typical way that scholars divide them is Satkarya and Asatkarya. Please write those terms down. Now, here's some vocabulary. This is good for you. Vada means a point of view. The point of view of a school is a Vada. So for Shankaracharya Dvaita, the Vada is the world is illusory, Jagat Mityam, Brahman Satyam, only Brahman is true, the Atman Tattvamasi is non-different from. So this is the Vada. So Vada is a school's basic foundation, what I just said, foundational, non-negotiable. You're going to defend it for centuries. Presuppositions. And this is called Purusha and Prakriti, the ultimate realities. If you dissolved everything, dissolve, reduce, where would you get to a stop sign? Purusha and Prakriti. So now, the question is, we talk about ultimate truths from the effects. So from the effects, we make inferences about causes, just like they're doing. A theist says there must be intelligence and therefore there must be a God. But from the effects, you infer there must be a God. Let's forget about revelation. Imagine there's no Bible. That's a different source of knowledge. That's a third source of knowledge. The Bible is the Aptavachana words. Because for Christians, they're reliable, like Brahma was for the Hindus. Well, Jesus Christ would be, St. Augustine, whatever it is. These are Aptavachanas in Christianity. Reliable verbal authorities. If you bracket that and just use reason and argument, so you can't depend on scripture, not throw it out, but just bracket it for now. The thing is, all we have to go on in science and philosophy and theology, you have scripture, but in science and philosophy, all you have to go on is effects. And from the effects, you have to make inference about causes. So the Indian traditions can be divided into two streams here. One is, so Vada is a point of view. Satkarya Vada, Sat, like Satchidananda, Karya, Karya, Vada, and then put an A in front of that. The other is Asatkarya Vada. Now, Karya is an effect, and Sat means it exists. And what does that mean? The effect exists in the cause. The pot exists in the clay already, just needs to be brought out. Ghee exists in milk. That's Satkarya, that the effect is the ghee. But it already kind of exists in some kind of latent, at least in a potential way. It potentially exists in its cause. Nothing difficult. Asatkarya Vada say, no, the effect is a completely new thing. A pocket does not exist in the clay. If it did, you could pick up the clay and drink your tea from a lump of clay, but you can't. So the effect has something which the cause doesn't have. How can you say it's none different from the but let's not get into the problems right now. Let's just establish these two ways that Indian philosophy could be divided in these two ways. There's lots of other ways, of course. Satkarya and Vada just means a point of view, and the person who holds the point of view is Vadin. So Satkarya Vada is accepted by the Satkarya Vadins, those who hold that view. And the Asatkarya Vada would be Nyaya from the Hindu side, Mimamsa, and then Buddhists and Jains. So Buddhists and Jains are Asatkarya Vadins, and within the Vedic traditions, Nyaya, Mimamsa, Vaisheshika, three of the so-called six schools, Asatkarya Vada. Now the Satkarya Vada say, no, the effect is in the cause in some form or fashion, is Vedanta, Yoga, Samkhya. And even though the Shakta traditions didn't make it to the list of the six schools, the Tantrika, Siddha, Shakta traditions are all Satkarya Vada as well. Okay, keep all that in mind. Now, okay, so with the next couple of verses are going to be dealing with the relationships of effects and causes. Okay, verse 9. Effect subsists even prior to the operation of the causes. The pot exists in the clay latently. It already exists there. It just needs to be churned, and you need to add some. Okay, sure, you need to put it on a potter's wheel. You need to, you put your thumb in the middle, and you mean to do certain things, but it's potentially there. So therefore, the effect of the pot subsists even prior to the operation of the cause, even before you make it, before you operate on the cause by applying motion and so forth. It does exist there. It just is latent. Why? And there's 5 points here. So number one, he's going to discuss these 5 things in the commentary. So maybe you put your numbers now, and that'll help you read the commentary. Number one, the first claim, effects subsist, or you can just say exists, even prior to the operation of the cause. Whether you work the clay or not, still pothood is potential in it. Whether even if there's no human beings left on the planet, but still the clay has a potency of becoming a pot, even if no one activates that potency. Okay, that's number one. And why? For that which does not exist cannot be by any means brought into existence. It has to already exist. Things don't come from nothing. So if some effect is manifest, it must already in some sort of way exist. Otherwise, it's magic then. And no philosopher is going to accept magic. That's not philosophy, either Western or Eastern. All this mystic power stuff, that's why Patanjali gets brought into bad repute, because of chapter 3. Actually, that's not magic. It's subtle physics. But that's a story for another day. It's not magic at all. It's actually Sāṃkhya metaphysics. If you accept Sāṃkhya metaphysics, the siddhis are inevitable. They are natural corollaries of Sāṃkhya metaphysics. I've written a whole paper on this. Academic paper. So, number one, for that which does not exist cannot be by any means brought into existence. By the way, I wanted to read you. Where is this coming from? I'm going to go back a few hundred years to the Chandogya Upanishad. Give me a moment. Listen to this. Chandogya 6.2. I don't know, 4th, 5th century, 6th century BCE. Way before the Sāṃkhya Kārikā. In the beginning, son, who's talking to who? Shvetaketu, son of Aruni. So Aruni is talking to Shvetaketu. In the beginning, son, this world was simply what is Sat, existent. Remember the word Sat and Asat. One only, without a second. Now, on this point, some do say, so even back then there was these different positions. Even the Upanishads, way before Buddhism and Jainism. Now, on this point, some do say, in the beginning, this world was simply what is non-existent, Asat. One only, without a second, Asat. And from what is Asat was born the Sat. Some say, says Aruni to his son Shvetaketu. And then he continues, but son, how can this possibly be? He continued, how can what is existent be born from non-existent? On the contrary, son, in the beginning, this world was simply what is existent, Sat. That's why we have Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Sat means to always be in a state of continual ongoing existence. Sat is the present active participle. Ari, if you're still there, that's coming up in chapter 12 or 13. Present active participles of Sanskrit. The ing forms of English, going, talking, sing-ing. If someone is in an ing state, it means they're ongoingly in that state. So if you're singing, until someone comes up and says, well, he stopped. If someone doesn't come up and say he stopped, and you're in a running or singing, it means you remain in that state till there's a change. So Sat is that form, the ing form. And that's why it's translated as being. Because it's be, us, it comes from the root us, to be. And then being, we put the ing on. Well, in Sanskrit, you render that verbal form in a different way, and it becomes Sat. So right here in the Upanishads, you see Sat Karyavad. That's why the Vedanta is Sat Karyavad. Remember, we said Buddhists were not, and Jains were not, Mimamsa, but the Vedantins are. Why? Well, right here. How can that possibly be? He says, Haruni, it's nonsense, he says. How can what is existent be born from what is non-existent? On the contrary, son, in the beginning, this world was simply what is existent, Sat, one only without a second. Okay, so it has its roots in the Upanishads. I was just giving you a little historical moment there. So, number one, okay, effect subsists even prior to the operation of the causes. For that which does not exist cannot by any means be brought into existence, just like we read centuries earlier. Further, number two, only appropriate materials are selected. What does that mean? Appropriate materials are selected. Olive oil only comes from olives. It doesn't come from oranges. There has to be appropriate relationship between cause and effect. Okay, so he'll give examples, so don't worry. We're just listing. Remember, the Karika just gives us the blunt points, and the commentaries explain it and give examples. That's what a commentary is. It sets out to do, to clarify the sutra of the Karika. So now the second reason, but only appropriate materials are selected. Only, right? Number three, everything is not by every means possible. In other words, if you deny the relationship of effect and cause, well, anything could pop out of anything. If you say the effect does not exist in the cause and is a new thing, well, why can't, well, then oranges should pop out of the ground, and, you know, and anything would manifest from anything if there was no relationship between cause and effect. If the effects didn't somehow exist in the cause, then why and I'm pressing olives. Why wouldn't gasoline come out then? Why wouldn't, you know, elephants come out? There has to be a relationship between the effect and the cause. And if there's a relationship, then the effect must pre-exist somehow in the cause. That's the argument. So therefore, only appropriate materials are selected. And they give the example of sesame oil. Well, it comes from sesame seeds, not from not from pistachios. Third thing, everything is not by every means possible. What I just said. Otherwise, things would be popping out from anywhere. If something could come from nowhere, well, my God, imagine what a random universe that would be. Walk out in your garden and walk into an elephant then, just popped out the ground, out of nowhere. So everything is not by every means possible. And capable. So these arguments overlap, by the way. Capable causes produce only that which they are competent to produce. And that maybe my olive oil argument is better here. Olives can only give you olive oil. They cannot give you butter or ghee. So, and finally, the effect is not different from the cause. Okay, let's read the commentary, and then we'll have our kirtan, my friends. So we go up to the Bharsha. It's not too long. We're on page 62. Okay, here a doubt arises. Is that the right one? Yeah. Is that 9? Yeah. So page 62, the Bharsha. Here a doubt arises, okay? And we know that the doubt is going to be the Purvapaksha. Here a doubt arises on account of the conflicting opinions of the teachers. And even within the Vedic schools, there's differences. It's one thing saying the Buddhists and the Jains, because you could say, oh, that, you know, they left the Vedic fold, they unmoored themselves, okay, they're off, you know. But even within the Vedic system, there's differences. So on account of the conflicting opinions of the teachers, whether the effect, and he's talking about intellect and all the things that emerge from Prakriti, all these effects, the ego and the 10, blah, 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 the 25 things. So whether the effect, intellect and the rest, whether they're already existing in Prakriti or not. So that's the question. And there's a doubt. According to the Sāṃkhya doctrine, the Siddhanta, our doctrine, the effects are existing in the cause. Maybe they're latent, but they're there. Their potential is there. Well, according to the Baudas, that's the term for the Buddhists, the Baudas, the effects are not so existing, because in Buddhism, everything is momentary. So how can an effect pre-exist in the cause when everything is momentary? Not only that, but everything is interdependent. Nothing has an autonomous essence. So there are no causes in one sense. There's no sort of essentialized cause. Let's not get into Buddhism. we got our hands full right with this. But they are the Purvapaksha. I know Buddhism is very popular on Main Street, but just be clear that they are the big Purva Paksha for Vedanta. They're the Purva Paksha in the Yoga Sutras, chapter 4. There's about 20 verses against a Vijnanavad, one school of Buddhism, so that you are going to find that they're the Purva Pakshas, along with many other Purva Pakshas. Oh, it's obvious. So while according to the Baudas, the effects are not so existing. In other words, the Baudas say that that the effects are brand new things. They don't pre-exist in causes. For that which is cannot cease to be, said the right, and that which is not can by no means be. What? For that which is cannot cease. So if something is sat, then it can't not be. If something is, how is not? Just as something can't appear from nowhere, it's not going to disappear into nowhere either. By the same principle. If it's magic to say, to imagine that something just pops out of nowhere, but if that's magical thinking, no philosopher would accept that. By the same token, then, if something can't come from nothing, well, it can't disappear into nothing either. So if something is, it's always going to be. It may change, right? Sāṃkhya is going to say, sure, trees dissolve, they die, they rot, they go back into their atoms, and they reconfigure, but ultimately everything continues to be eternally. By dint of just being part of, ultimately they might dissolve back to the three gunas and back to Prakriti, but if something is, it cannot just magically disappear. It can go back into its subtlest substructure, but it's not going to disappear, just as it's not going to appear in the first place. So that's what he's saying here. So here it is said, right, number one, remember those 5 things? Number one, from there being no production of that which does not exist. If something doesn't exist, it can't produce something. Non-existence cannot be productive because it doesn't exist. So how can it produce anything? Non-existent is that which does not exist. Since there can be no production of that which does not exist. If it doesn't exist, how's it going to produce anything? Therefore, the effect exists. Remember that, keep the eye on the ball. They want to say the effect must exist in the cause. So the cause must exist. Why? Because existence can't come from non-existence, so it must come from something which exists. Satka, it must exist already in the cause. In this world, there's no production of the non-existent. Something which doesn't exist doesn't produce something because it doesn't exist. Just as oil, here's a different argument though. Just as oil cannot be produced from the sands, but that argument, is, as far as I can tell, belongs later on. I don't know why he's putting it here. The argument here is that if something exists, it must come from an existing thing. So there must be a connection between the two. Anyway, therefore the effect exists prior to production. Before being produced, it kind of exists latently. Remember the pot and the clay. Therefore the manifest, the vyakta, is in Prakriti. It's already there, just needs to be stirred. Since the effect exists. Why? Because effects can't come from nothing. Now, second reason, when he says again, that means, well, now again, here's another reason. So again, number 2, on account of the selection of the material. Okay? So upadana means the material cause. Upadana means the material cause. Right? We gave the example of olives. Olive oil only comes from olives. So the material cause of olive oil, is only one material cause. So let's see how he puts it. Upadana means the material cause, on account of the selection of this material cause. So, for example, in this world, a man selects, or a woman, selects the material cause of that which he desires to have. So, one who wants curds, cheese, selects milk, not water. So whatever you want, you have to find the correct material cause. So what does that mean? That means your effect that you seek must already be existing. It only exists in one particular. If it came out of nowhere, then any cause could produce anything. But you want cheese. You're not going to go and try and make cheese out of water. You've got to go to milk. So that means that somehow or other the cheese is already existing in that particular material cause. This is the argument. Therefore, the effect exists. So he's going to repeat this 5 times. Therefore, the effect exists. That's sat karya. Sat exists, karya, effect. It sounds clunky in English, but it's a literal translation of sat karya. Therefore, he's written the effect exists. If we get a little sophisticated with our terminology, could say, therefore, sat karya. Third reason. And for this reason also, since everything cannot be produced from everything or everywhere, things only come from very particular causes. Not things are popping out of the ground all over the place. All the things are not produced at all places. Just as gold can't be produced from silver or grass or dust and sand, it comes from ore. So therefore it's already latent in the ore. So therefore sat, it exists. Karya, the effect, gold, sat exists in the ore. That's the position they want to take. Remember what they're doing. They're arguing that there must be Prakriti. Really what they're interested in is Purusha, by the way. They're interested in Purusha, same as the yogins, but Patanjali's piggybacking on all their hard work. He's just saying, okay, Ata Yoga Anushasana, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Tadadrashtu Swarupe Vasana. The seer abides in its own nature. How do you know there's a seer in the first place? Because Samkhya did all the legwork. Samkhya did all of this stuff. And then Patanjali's go, thanks, chaps. Okay, you did all that boring stuff. Now we can do the even more boring stuff. Chitta Vritti Nirodha. But he's assuming. Who's going to do Patanjali and yoga unless they know there's a drashtra, a seer? I keep saying this. What fool is going to go to the forest for 50 years in Chitta Vritti Nirodha just to see what happens? You'd have to be really convinced that there's a seer behind the Chitta Vritti. And how are you convinced about that then? Right knowledge. Samkhya did all the right knowledge stuff for you and showed you that there must be an Atman, an intelligent entity that's different from the mind. Who did all that work? Patanjali's just presupposing it. He's just accepting the whole metaphysics. All right, you did all the groundwork for me. And he can just get on with meditation. Do you see how they're one? But Samkhya did the legwork. And here's the legwork. Where are we? Let's finish this up. We've got kirtan coming up. And I lost my page. So number 3, down the bottom. For this reason also, since everything cannot be produced from everything or everywhere, all the things are not produced at all places. We just read that. Gold can't be produced from silver, grass, dust, and sand. So since everything cannot be produced from everywhere, the effect must exist in one particular cause. Effects exist. Satkarya. What else? And on account of this also, number 4. Another reason. Since a competent thing produces that which it is competent to produce. I gave the example of olives are only competent to produce olive oil. They're not competent to produce apple juice. Or competent, maybe not the best translation. Qualified. So a competent thing produces that which is competent to produce. For example, in this world, right, he's going to give examples in our world to talk about things beyond our world, like the existence of Prakriti and Purusha. But you have to start off with arguing from what we do know. So in our world, this world, a competent person, a potter, or the competent means like earth, a wheel, a thread of rags, water, etc., they produce only. So from the lump of clay, the jar is capable of being produced. You can't make cloth out of a lump of clay. You can't make, spaghetti alla carbonara from a lump of clay, because it's only because the effects, the cause can only produce certain effects. That means those effects must exist in the cause. Keep your eye on the ball. That's what they're arguing in all of these 5 illustrations. Therefore, the effect exists, as the 4th time he said that, Satkarya. And finally, from this reason also, number 5, the effect is the nature of the, actually some of these overlap, by the way. And from this reason also, that the effect is of the nature of the cause. Whatever is the nature of the cause, the same is the nature of the effect. this is very similar. I actually personally, I myself feel like some of these are redundant. They could be, like the 3 modes of sense perception. If you postulate 6, you could actually fit them into 3. I think these 5 could actually be reduced to 3. It doesn't matter. They would have reasons for saying there's 5, and I want to respect that. I personally, I myself feel that they could have trimmed these to 3, but let's go with Ishvara Krishna. He's a much greater mind than mine, and I'm completely willing to accept that, or that's Gaudapada, sorry, that he has reasons for saying this. This seems the same to me, but nonetheless, see what you think. And from this reason also, that the effect is of the nature of the cause. Whatever is the nature of the cause, the same is the nature of the effect. Just as barley is produced from barley seeds, right? The barley is produced from a barley seed, not rice, and rice from rice. If the effect were non-existent and it didn't already exist in the cause, then rice could be produced from this other grain, kodravas. Or rice could be produced from barley, and barley could be produced from rice, but that's not the case. So therefore, again, keep your eye on the book. The effect must exist in the cause, sat karya, but they're not so produced. Hence, the effect exists, sat karya. In this manner, on account of these 5 reasons, the mergent, I would say emergent. I think what he means when he writes mergent is emergent. I think it's just slightly confusing English. Mergent means when it goes back, and which it does eventually at the end of creation. It merges back. But here I think he means emergent. I just think he didn't quite get the word right. So the emergent Mahat and the rest, they all exist in Prakriti. Hence it is proved, so he's made his case, that the existent is produced and not the existent is produced. It comes from a cause and not the non-existent. All right. So this will all. So therefore, he's saying there is a Prakriti, which from which all the effect. How do you know that? From the effects. The effects must all come from Prakriti, and they must have the same nature as Prakriti, because even though they're different, like the pot and the clay, but it's still clay. So all of this is the 3 gunas. So therefore, Prakriti must also be the 3 gunas. It like the pot, it's different in some ways, but the same. So Prakriti itself must, because all the effects have the 3 gunas. It's like saying the sunshine. Let's say you never saw the sun. All you saw was the light. Well, the light is light and hot. So you never seen the sun, but you could infer. You didn't know if there's 1 sun or 2 suns or 10 suns or something else. But you would know one thing about the cause of the light and the heat. You'd know that it was hot and light. Whatever that cause of the luminosity we see in our world and the heat that we feel in the world, let's say you couldn't see the sun because it was too far or whatever reason, one of these reasons, he gave 8 reasons. 8 reasons why you might not see something. Maybe it was in minute and supremely hot, but minute. Maybe it's too far. So let's suppose you never saw the sun. All you knew was the light and the heat, and you sit around, and you wonder what is the cause. One thing whatever the cause is, it must be hot and it must be luminous, because otherwise how would luminosity and heat be in the effect? It must come from the cause. If it doesn't come from the cause, then it comes from some other cause then. Well, then now what do you want? 2 causes? So therefore, if something's in the effect, it must be in the cause. That's the basic metaphysical argument, which is going to be challenged by other schools, by the way, very vigorously. But if you're a Vedantin, if you're a Vaishnava, if you're a Shakta, if you're a Shaiva, if you're a yogi, or if you're a Sankhyan, you are a Sat Karyavadin. What you personally meaning, if you identify with those schools and you wear a t-shirt saying, I am a yogi or a yogini or a Vedantin, then that means you accept Sat Karyavad. So you might want to know what the arguments are that comprise Sat Karyavad. Okay. So
Thank you.
Lakshmi, my friend, are you there? We have 20 minutes of kirtan, and then if some of you want to linger, I'll take a couple of questions. But I don't want to keep Lakshmi waiting. So Lakshmi is an old friend of mine from my ashram days, back in the 80s, and he was in charge of the ashram. We had an ashram, and he was in charge. And so our relationship goes back 20 years, and he's now a householder, and he has a beautiful wife and child, and they live in Puerto Rico. And he's a lifelong bhakta of Sri Krishna, and he's from his many devotional talents. Kirtan, I think, is the one that defines him the most in the public eye. When we think of Lakshmi, we think a wonderful person, but we also think of Kirtan. So he's going to lead us, and he has a thing, by the way. If you're interested, it's free of charge. Every morning he does a 20-minute Kirtan. So Lakshmi, if you want to put your Facebook thing in chat.
I did.
Oh, you did. Okay. So where are you? Do you want to? It's over to you, Lakshmi. Thank you so much for joining.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. Can you put yourself in the screen? So I'm sick of looking at my ugly face here.
How do I do that?
I don't know. How do we do that? Oh, there you are. Wait. There you are. I can pin you. I can probably
gallery view. Change your view.
Pin.
Oh my God.
Remove all spotlighted videos. Do I hit yes? Somebody tell me.
You have to spotlight him. Spotlight him.
Oh, spotlight. Okay.
Spotlight him.
Wait. Can you see him?
Not until you spotlight him.
Well, how do I get rid of me?
There you go.
How do you
spotlight him?
Yeah, we're seeing.
Oh, finally. Okay. Jai Sri Radhe, Lakshmi ji.
Jai Radhe Sham. Jai Krishna Balaram ki jai.
Jai Ho.
You see, Krishna Balaram's with me. Okay, thank you so much, Edwin, for the invitation, and thank you all for hanging out and participating in the kirtan with me. We'll do 2 mantras this evening, both very ancient mantras. The first one is Om Namo Bhagavate Vaya.
Oh, I love that.
If you like that, good. I'm glad you do. And the second one is the Hare Krishna mantra.
Hare Krishna.
So we'll do both.
Can I just
say this little
sorry, Lakshmi? Can I just
sure?
Can somebody tell me how I can, as the host, can mute everybody except Lakshmi? How do I do that?
We're all muted. Mute yourself.
Oh, okay. No, but there was somebody else there. That was not me.
Go to participants, choose mute all, then unmute Lakshmi.
Okay, and I've done that. How do I unmute Lakshmi? Okay, I think I know how to do that. I got to scroll all the way down, right?
No, sorry. I'm pretty sure that he can unmute himself. He just has to unmute himself, and it should be fine. Because actually, he muted everyone, and I can unmute myself, so he can do it himself.
Yeah, I unmuted myself. Okay. All right. Let me just try. So the sound is okay, right?
It's perfect. Yeah. And I'm going to mute myself. And Lakshmi, do explain your instrument if you get a second.
Oh yeah, this is a very simple, beautiful instrument called ektar. You've heard of the sitar, 6 strings. This is ektar, 1 string. And basically it's for the most part, it's a rhythmic instrument, kind of dronal / rhythmic instrument. And when you're chanting alone, can you hear that at all? Can you hear that? Barely?
Barely.
So.
Barely.
Yeah, I know. It's a very Well, it's not meant to be like a lead guitar or anything. It's the background. So I'll start off as we do in our bhakti lineage, our bhakti tradition. We first start off with mantras of gratitude and respect to our teacher or teachers, those who have illuminated our path with the torchlight of knowledge, who encourage us, enthuse us, and empower us on our path of bhakti. So these are several mantras in gratitude for what the teacher is giving us. Om Jnana Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuro Militam Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manopistam Stabitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapodantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Itinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Pastatya Deshotarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Lakshmi, there's a weird kind of almost like a bird chirping sound. I don't know if that's your end or it's like a squeaky wheel the whole time.
It's natural. It's the birds and the frogs of Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. Good to know. Okay.
The higher pitched ones are called coquis. They're kind of like the mascot of Puerto Rico. They're tiny, tiny little frogs that make big noise. And if you're a really light sleeper, you have a really hard time, like me. Can't get rid of it. I could have my cat try to chase them away, but there's too many of them. Other than that, is the sound okay, voice and Ektar?
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Sri Sri Radhe Shyam, Jai Sri Sri Krishna Balaram Ki Jai.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Lakshmi.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what would we like to do, friends? We call it, should we wrap it up, or do we want to go back to Sāṃkhya after that beautiful kirtan, which puts us into a place of heart and devotion? Should we take that into our dreams and our sleep and try to remember Ishvara in our dreams? Because one of the commentators of the Yoga Sutra says, you know your practice is working, your bhakti practice, if you actually start dreaming of Ishvara, because dreams are what you think about during the day. And then the more intensely you know, something happens, that's more likely to emerge in a dream. So if you're thinking of Ishvara intensely during the day, if you're actually dreaming of Ishvara, then you're really, you're way up there on the path. So shall we take these beautiful ragas into our, where I am anyway, it's bedtime. I mean, if you desperately have questions, I don't want to deny you the opportunity to ask questions, but we can ask them another time. So we bid each other good night, and God bless. And in our lineage, Lakshmi and I, we say Jai Shri Radhe Shyam. Shri Radhe Shyam. Good night then. Thank you, Lakshmi. Beautiful sound effects, man. Come on, you need a whole studio in New York City to get some of that going.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
It's literally my orchestra. In the daytime, we have roosters and chickens chiming in also. So, and I live in the city. I live in San Juan City. I don't live in the country.
Right.